Welcome to this Mobile World Live topic panel on the theme of how operators can capitalize on 5G advanced upgrades. This session is sponsored by CSG and Radisys. Thank you for joining us. My name is Joseph Waring. I'm the Asia editor for Mobile World Live. I'm based in Hong Kong, and I'll be moderating this session. The next iteration of 5G, 5G Advanced, is increasingly capturing attention from operators as they continue their search for new revenue streams and greater customer engagement. The first 5G Advanced standards were frozen last month, paving the way for commercial rollouts to accelerate globally. China Mobile made an early move to the technology, announcing plans to deploy 5G Advanced in 300 cities by the end of this year. This topic panel will examine what value the technology can bring mobile operators in terms of fresh revenue streams from new case studies, as well as cost reduction through improved network efficiency and increased capacity and coverage. We have four expert panelists joining us today. GSMA Intelligence Head Peter Yarich will start things off with a high-level overview before we shift into the discussion. Our other panelists are Eagle Gronstadt, T-Mobile's Senior Director of System Architecture. We also have Sean Casey. He's a Senior Vice President of Product Management at CSG. And Munish Chhabra, Head of Mobility Software and Services at Radisys. Thanks for joining us. Before we start, I want to let the audience know that you can submit questions at any point during this session. Look for the box below the slides and type in your query. And then later in the session, I'll refer to some of those questions, and hopefully the panelists can answer most of those questions. So let me turn things over to Peter to start things off.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks to everyone for being here, and thanks to CSG and Radisys for sponsoring this session. I think I've known and worked with both companies for years, and it's not surprising to see innovators talking about such an important topic. And thank you all for tuning in today, because I think it's something that we all should be talking about. Like Joseph said, just to give a bit of context, sort of what are we seeing at GSMA Intelligence in terms of 5G Advanced? Why do we think it's important? What does it mean? And then we'll kick off to the panel. So let me just go and share my screen, and hopefully this will work out well. Let's see. Wonderful. So, as Joseph called out, the session is how can operators capitalize on 5G Advanced upgrades? And, it's an important question, but obviously it deserves a little bit of a scene-setting conversation and discussion for really what does that all mean? And look at that, you start at the end. So, need to get to, obviously, any discussion here, begin with the question of what is 5G Advanced? Now, I've just put together there's tons of charts out there, tons of slideware that can talk about what it is. And so I just took one because Qualcomm does a really good job of putting together compact, very clear discussions, very clear charts of various new technologies. Surprise, surprise, as someone who is at the forefront of defining those standards. And really, what's key here is at the bottom, right? 5G Advanced, part of the 3GPP releases, release 18 sets it off. Some people have been talking about it as 5.5G, but really we should think about it as a stepping stone between the 5G that we kicked off and going forward to 6G, right? Of course, it's not just a sort of stepping stone. It comes with a lot of new capabilities, right? New capabilities on the radio side of things, antenna side of things, right? You see new MIMO upgrades, enhanced mobility, right? New duplexing modes, the way we send data. But really, technologies aside, it's important to think about really what does this mean in terms of use cases, right? So improvements on things like the metaverse, interactive communications, right? Extended reality, whatever you want to call it. Support for things like multicast, which we've seen, and we'll talk a bit later. Getting a lot of attention from operators. Extension to what we're doing with non-terrestrial networks, meaning drones and satellites, and then things like, you've probably all heard about this, NR Lite or RedCap, as well as enhanced positioning, right? So again, I think it's the case with any technology, right? We can talk about the technology and what it brings and how it's going to reach sort of new capabilities, but it's those use cases, right? In this case, the stuff on the right side of the screen that are important. If we then go and look at this, another way, we can also think about this, where this sits in terms of where we've been on network technologies and where we're going. This was from a research paper that the GSMA put out a short while ago. This chart was something that we helped them put together. And it's looking at sort of where we were from 2G to 3G to 4G, how we grew the size of the industry from hundreds of billions to trillion plus, the number of connections, right, going out there in terms of less than a billion to well over 10 billion in the 2025 period. And then, of course, you see sort of the use cases, right, going from SMS to voice, adding in data, adding in sort of interactive communications, then where we go in the 5G world, and then building on top of that with things like non-terrestrial network, enhanced non-terrestrial network, things like RedCap, ambient IoT. And again, in a lot of cases, we're not talking about super new use cases, but we're talking about enhancements, right? Enhancements to what we're doing in terms of interactive communications. Yes, those were available before in 5G. 5G Advanced will bring improvements on things like slicing, improvement on things like NTN capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. And that's important, right? Because this is all about an evolution from 5G on the way to 6G. So that's great. Question is, what are we hearing from operators, right? So GSMA intelligence, we go out, we talk to operators on a regular basis. You can imagine that as a research firm, we've got a fairly solid set of operators that we reach out to and talk with on a continuing basis. And what do we find? So when we went out end of last year, asked about the priority technologies, like what parts of this, right? What's key for you in terms of 5G Advanced going forward? What do we see? Not too surprising. See things like improved uplink, security, edge computing. Why is that not too surprising? Well, if you look at those, and let's add in things like network slicing, right? Network slicing, edge computing, really important for B2B revenues, really important for pushing into those new markets that 5G was supposed to help with. Cool, right? Security enhancements, we know how important security is. It's become increasingly important as we add in things like massive IoT and we scale our IoT deployments. We're only increasing the attack surface. Security becomes much more important. Uplink performance. Uplink performance is that important, again, because we're having more and more interactive communications where you need uplink along with downlink, and particularly for things like metaverse, when it may come, and other immersive applications, you're going to need that uplink. Great, so that's sort of on the technology side of things. If we think about this then, and we ask about what are the use cases. So going back, when I talked before in terms of technologies versus use case, what are the use cases that we see operators talking about? Multicast services came out on top, right? If you look at sort of the top 2 ranked use cases. That's surprising for a lot of folks. I've had a lot of our customers say, I don't get that. It doesn't make sense. They're not talking to us about that. Now that might be something that we're just not seeing, the market's not seeing, or maybe operators are holding their back pocket, but it's interesting, right? Because it shows the importance of figuring out how to deal with, how to efficiently transport lots of high bandwidth data, things like video, that take up a lot of capacity on the network and can be done potentially more efficiently with things like multicast. Low-cost IoT, not too surprising. Again, this goes back to that B2B side of things. A lot of the discussion around B2B and enterprise communications, again, the whole discussion around how do we monetize 5G networks, reach out to new audiences, reaching to enterprise verticals, B2B services, that's really about IoT, right? We've got the whole voice data, smartphones out to enterprises. Yes, there's room to expand that, but really the IoT side of things was the expansion opportunity. And so you see this low-cost IoT support factored in to what operators want from 5G Advanced. And then enhanced integration with satellite resources. We know over the last year, 2 years, and now we're beginning to see those constellations come into play, focus on how we integrate satellite networks into our cellular networks is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. Obviously, as it's ingrained in the standards of 5G Advanced, you're going to see that play there. Now, another way that we look at it when we go out and we talk to operators is to ask them, hey, how do you see this as something that is, going to drive a change in the way that you deal with various parts of the network? Now, what I've done here is I've shown sort of the side of things as we look at the network side of things and key issues on the network agenda, API exposure, open networking, new suppliers, generative AI. And what I've done here is I've taken the side, and the chart here shows those folks that are either unlikely or somewhere on the, somewhere in the middle, right? Neither likely nor unlikely to unlikely. Put that to the side, right? You see where that sits. The important part here are that number that you're looking at, right? And that number of what you're looking at shows the number of operators that said they're either very or somewhat likely to use 5G Advanced as a trigger, as an opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to engage with these new technologies, right? And what do we see? Yeah, for things like new suppliers, things for generative AI being particularly new for a lot of operators, new suppliers being, yeah, supply chain diversity, but they're already working on it. It's not very high, right? They don't see 5G Advanced as really moving the needle for them to engage with new companies or maybe start doing something around generative AI, possibly because they're already doing that. But what you do see is around things like API exposure, making network capabilities available to developers so that they can use those transparently, and things like open networking, particularly around Open RAN, huge interest, right? You see that 70+% saying they're either very or somewhat likely to look at 5G Advanced as an opportunity to engage on that. It says for a lot of suppliers, that's a huge opportunity, something you need to be thinking about. Lastly, I want to say, as we think about how can telcos execute, remaining focused on core network priorities is still key, right? We can talk about things like what are the technologies, what are the use cases, but we want to come back to some fundamentals. And for operators, it has to come back to this. These are what we see in terms of top strategy drivers. It's not about saving money, CapEx or OpEx, but really generating new revenues, whether that's new types of revenues, whether that's improving the customer experience. You see that. We talk to operators, they say that's what's driving their strategy in the network. That has to factor into 5G Advanced. But then at the same time, that also has to factor into a realistic view of timelines. Because when we look at timelines, and you see it here, what do we see when we talk to operators? We see that more than half think that once commercial solutions are available, they will have the technology deployed. That's very optimistic. We saw something similar around standalone. It doesn't necessarily seem very realistic. And I'd say it's critical for operators to be realistic about that, or else we can see them really taking a hit on those expectations, which can have a knock-on effect in terms of how they deploy it. So with that, I just want to say thank you all very much. Hopefully that provides a bit of context. I'm going to stop sharing so we can get to the discussion. Joseph, it's back over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Peter, for that insight and really setting the stage for the discussion that we're going to start right now. So first, I want to ask Eagle for his view on what 5G Advantage offers compared to 5G and how it can help drive new revenue streams, with these new use cases Peter was referring to.
Thank you, Joseph. Appreciate that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, all clear.
Okay. So there's a number of aspects to discuss around that, right? So Peter did a good job outlining 5G Advanced, especially as it relates to 3GPP releases, which starts in release 18 and goes on to release 19. And so if we stay with the terminology of 5G Advanced as defined by feature set in the 3GPP, I think we see a number of different opportunities as far as creating new revenue streams going forward. I think Peter pointed out IoT opportunities, lower cost IoT opportunity being one. And we see a couple of things coming in there, both when it comes to enhancements in RedCap, where we will see some lower complexity and cost and better coverage and reliability. So also lower power consumption. So we're quite excited about that opportunity. Another IoT related capability coming in 5G Advanced and 3GPP is ambient IoT. It's a little bit further out there, but I think it's part of release 19. But that is something that we do believe is has a lot of opportunities, much lower cost devices, and no battery, right? It opens up a lot of opportunities for new revenue streams. We think for operators. And then there are some other things, when it comes to and it's maybe a little bit later out there. Don't know if it's going to make it into release 19, or maybe it's coming later. Maybe it's only in coming in 6G, but it certainly is being studied now in 3GPP for 5G Advanced. That is integrated sensing and communication, where you essentially are going to use the network sort of as a radar system to see and feel its surroundings and be able to detect objects and things out there. And I think we're quite excited about that. We'll see if it makes it into 5G Advanced or not. And then, of course, there is a number of other opportunities with the cost reduction and improvement in efficiency. We can go into that more later if you want, but I wanted to talk a little bit more in general about 5G Advanced and what we mean by it, because of course we've been at 5G now for more than 5 years, or around 5 years. So of course, whatever we do today is more advanced than what we did when we introduced 5G. So if you go a little bit outside of the sort of pure 3GPP definition, then of course there is a lot going on right now with network monetization, right? Using slicing and API exposure, as Peter talked about. That is very important for us, and that is really our major focus right now, is to be able to expose capabilities in the network so that certain new use cases, especially in enterprise, but also consumers, are able to take advantage of specific capabilities, and so we can cater to their KPI needs as they are introducing these new use cases that can get monetized. So that's one aspect. So making 5G more advanced by its nature without necessarily it adhering specifically to 3GPP's definition.
Right.
But then I want to mention one more thing before I end, and that is, we as an industry are already sort of diluting this whole 3GPP terminology, as we normally do, right? So I did read in Mobile World Live publication just on July 2nd, Optus trials 5G-A feature to raise throughput. And it's about Optus testing Ericsson's interference sensing technology, a new software feature in its massive MIMO 5G Advanced portfolio designed to boost throughput and network capacity. And I tried to find out, well, which release 18 or 19 features was actually put to its test there. And I come back with blank. There was no 3GPP features. So vendors, and I'm sure operators as well, are starting to just use 5G Advanced as the sort of terminology for, well, it's more advanced than it was yesterday.
Exactly.
So it's proprietary features, and so it gets a little muddy.
No, that's a very, very good point. That's I actually wrote that article.
There you go.
I had a hard time with that. It's a lot of hype and a lot of just using the 5G or as a branding, right? Just pure branding. That's what it seems like to a certain extent. So thanks for that overview. And you mentioned about network efficiency and capacity increase. We'll get to that a little bit later. But now I want to bring in Sean to ask the same question, really, in terms of 5G capabilities and driving new revenue streams. So I want to bring Sean into that.
Happy to jump in there, Joseph. So Yeah, when we think about kind of driving your revenue streams, and obviously Peter's research showed that was kind of the number one driver, number one opportunity for operators. The way that we think about that is 5G Advanced really has to get to what I'd call kind of platformization of these mobile networks. We actually saw a lot of the tech companies, use 3G and 4G as their way to enable their own platforms. You look at the performance of Apple's stock since 2008 compared to the operator stock, and there's just obviously a huge difference between the two. And the reason for that is Apple actually used that data stream, right, which was kind of in a way, opening up the networks for more and more traffic to go through it. They use that data stream to build their platforms on top of it. So 5G Advanced, in my view, allows operators to get back to where they can actually create their networks as platforms that open up to more and more different types of opportunities to come onto the system and the platforms. Things like private networks, IoT providers, all of that is the big opportunity space for 5G Advanced for the operators to grow revenue. And as a result of that, we think operators really need to modernize their approach to how they engage with customers, which really kind of touches on the second piece of what Peter presented in terms of the opportunity space, which is improving customer experience. So as operators go through and do these network deployments and actually build out these more advanced networks and invest heavily into them, they also need to upgrade their OSS and BSS systems to be able to keep up with those changes and actually make it much easier for partners to come into that network itself and essentially sell those services as part of the overall package to those new industries and verticals that they're going to pursue. And when you think about that, what the operators actually are going to be providing is a much better and much more robust SLA around the service itself. That might come through the form of network slicing in terms of what's guaranteed for the customer. Probably will come in the form of dynamic quality of service, where the networks themselves can be a lot more responsive to the demand and be able to prioritize based on the various access points and contracts that they have within the network to guarantee that service. But all of that's going to actually mean that operators need to, again, enhance their BSS and OS systems to be more dynamic, more modernized, more responsive to the opportunities, so that operators can actually basically open up these networks to these new spaces. So when we think about the commercial opportunities, we do see the same as what we've talked about here, private networks, IoT, and so forth. But we then play that through and say, actually, how do you make it as easy as possible for those new verticals to come in and utilize the network as an asset in their component, and then actually properly monetize and sell the variability that 5G gives you in terms of the performance of the network and responsiveness of the network through things like the software-defined components of the network are going to be critical to supporting that commercialization. So operators can't just focus on enhancing the network. They've also got to modernize their back-end supporting systems to really take advantage of those commercial opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Good point. So does that actually mean, with the standards frozen, can operators realistically move into this direction, like in the next 6 months, or is it going to take a lot longer? What's your view on that?
Yeah, well, it's gonna depend on each operator and kind of how they're looking at their business cases to do it. But certainly, we think with the standards starting to freeze here or being frozen in the very near future, they can move in that direction. And so enabling that network and enabling a platform for it's going to be key. And then starting to arm their sales teams to pursue those directions and find partnerships to optimize kind of where they can actually pursue and win. We do think that can definitely happen in the next 6 months.
Great. So I want to bring in Munish from Radisys. Peter talked a bit about non-terrestrial networks, and in our briefing before the event, you shared a lot of detail on co-location and seamless connectivity. So how is this the new architecture helping simplify things for non-terrestrial networks?
Thank you, Yusuf. So before we jump on to just the non-terrestrial networks, I think the concept comes in with respect to 5G Advanced offering enhanced connectivity. And you see today a lot of momentum in terms of terrestrial service providers tying up with non-terrestrial service providers. And one of the biggest challenge in the non-terrestrial environment was that it was not it was always proprietary in nature. It was not taking advantages of the enhancements which were happening on the terrestrial networks. And this is what has changed from 3GPP perspective, taking up this, I would say, redefining the non-terrestrial networks, where it's not just you cater to the needs for non-terrestrial network, but also you look at how both of them can coexist, which would potentially lead to cases like, you're catering to ubiquitous connectivity, so you're connected everywhere, and it becomes seamless to that point where you're able to do roaming between terrestrial and non-terrestrial, just like you're able to do today between the two terrestrial networks. And again, in terrestrial networks, the way non-terrestrial networks, the way it started with transparent mode, it is emerging into going more and more into regenerative. Again, catering to the use cases or new services which can be offered to create more monetization. I would say verticals, right? And one important aspect that also comes from this is the operational benefits that comes with the coexistence. So when the Open RAN get gets adopted also in the non-terrestrial network, then think of this: the same data center or the same network being able to run loads for terrestrial and non-terrestrial, right? So that's where you get a lot of operational efficiency as well, when both of them coexist and they offer connectivity for the set of subscribers all across.
Great. So let's go back to Eagle and move on to the reducing costs through improved network efficiency. That's a topic that you I know you wanted to go through that.
Sure. So there's a number of things that we see in 3GPP 5G-Advanced now to reduce the cost for operator and improve the efficiency. I think one of the big things is that we do see a good framework developed for energy saving, so reducing cell site power, making it more efficient with SSB less SL operation and DTX and DRX optimization. So these are meaningful full capabilities that we expect to take good advantage of. One thing is that it's good for the environment to reduce the power use, but power is also a very large portion of our OpEx cost. So anything we can do there will help to reduce operational cost for us. And then we also quite excited about there is some frameworks for AI and ML being introduced in 5G Advanced. One being there more related to automation, enabling greater automation. I've been a big believer of this for many years, that we should be able to automate our network a lot more than what we are doing today. There is too much manual tuning and tweaking of parameters to try to get it to work as well as possible. So using AI ML to enable automation of our network, there is huge potential for cost saving on that. And then last but not least, improve the spectrum efficiency. We have most operators, I think, when we have deployed, especially TDD for 5G, we're using massive MIMO systems or advanced antenna solutions with 64T64R typically. And I like to refer to that as the gift that keeps giving. That is a fairly significant investment that we made in a very advanced radio hardware. And we do see vendors continuing to introduce new capabilities to make it more efficient, get more spectral efficiency, and that also goes now for for 5G-Advanced with using AI/ML for beam management in order to increase the spectral efficiency. So that clearly is also a great benefit for operators like T-Mobile. So those are some aspects that I see when it comes to reducing cost and improving network efficiency.
All right, thank you. I want to shift back to Munish on that topic, because we talked about the AI and machine learning, improving automation, reducing manual. What's your take on that, Munish?
I think adding to what we heard from Akhil, this is really, I would say, reducing the operational expenses. If you think about it, the challenges that today the operator face, one is, of course, that you need to monetize. You need to create more streams for revenue to increase your ARPU. But the other thing is also on the cost savings. So what level of automation that can be brought in? And that's where 5G in general started with that. But with 5G Advanced coming in, it is actually expanding that further. And especially if we talk about spectral efficiency, so like usage of smaller bandwidths, which will, on one side, use the spectrum to the best, but also open new doors for newer markets. For example, different verticals. Let's say if you think about railways or other verticals, it opens up newer doors for that as well. And similarly, AI ML being introduced at different levels in RAN or even core. So right to the level that, to the baseband level, that what level of efficiency that you can create there, save power. There's a lot of momentum today. You hear a lot of it, but when we talk about the level of the automation being applied, that is very minimal today. So the new concepts which have been introduced by 5G, the realization of those concepts are being really taken by 5G Advanced by applying AI ML and automated in an automated way for improving the efficiency of the network and reducing the operating expenses. Also, I would say one important aspect, or one of the challenge that we hear from operators, is also in terms of convergence of wireline and wireless networks. So while you have both the networks today, they behave differently. Now, disaggregation has helped in a way, but again, 5G Advanced coming in with improved, I would say, enhancements specifically related to TSN and others would actually also help in creating a homogeneous network, which will cater to a kind of a common network, common set of resources being used, and more general purpose hardware or equipment being used, which will reduce both capital and the operational expenses as well.
Great. Hey, thanks. I want to bring Peter, who's been a little quiet right now. So, yeah, on that same topic, sort of operational efficiency, reducing cost.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, because as much as I called out that we talk with operators, we need to keep our eyes on the prize, right? That the big focus on growing revenues, improving the experience for users. That what we hear from operators is OpEx and CapEx efficiencies are lesser priorities. Doesn't mean they're not priorities, right? As much as you can't save your way to growth, we know that bottom line is important, and a penny saved is a penny earned, and so that's why any way that we can decrease costs, keep things in check, are important. But I think sometimes we look at this very simplistically, right? We just think about saving costs. I think we have to recognize is that as we move into further into this 5G era, and as we think about 5G Advanced, new services, new capabilities, it means our networks just get more complicated, services get more complex. Sean called us out, I think, really well, right? We can talk about the technologies. We can even talk about use cases, but those use cases come with knock-on effects, right? Knock-on effects like, how do we bill and charge for these things? How do we manage these things, right? Think about this, right? We still have 2G and 3G and 4G networks up in many places. Adding 5G and then 5G Advanced, it just makes this so much more complex. And so you move past the fact where if we don't integrate automation, your costs go up incredibly. And this is one of those things that I think is sometimes overlooked, right? And when you say it, everyone nods and they get it, but it's sometimes sort of forgotten. We talk about CapEx a lot. Well, CapEx, these big numbers, right? It's what operators report. The CapEx is up, their CapEx is down, it moves markets, right? All the financial guys look at that. OpEx is 3 to 4 times CapEx for many operators.
Yep.
Right. And so, it's nice to shave down some CapEx, but if you can shave down OpEx with things like automation, it has a much bigger impact, right? And so I think, all of these use cases that we're talking about are incredible. And on the automation front, right, it's why we see operators flagging automation as one of the top technologies for constraining OpEx, right? They recognize the importance and why it's going to be more important as those services become more and more complicated, right? Because you're not going to be able to orchestrate them. You're not going to be able to roll them out in the right way unless you have that support.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great point. And that's a perfect segue into bring Sean back in. Yeah, you talked about, improving their systems to be ready for, the new version of 5G. How are you doing that? I mean, and how important is AI and machine learning?
Yeah, it's funny when you look at kind of the supporting systems and how you enable them to be 5G advanced ready. It's almost the same pattern as what the networks themselves are doing. And that's moving to things like cloud, right? So if you can run more of your BSS and OSS systems in the cloud, while that alone isn't, technically AI, you do get things like cloud compute, right? And so you can actually spike or decrease your resources based on demand. We actually have a customer that has a very heavy Saturday traffic pattern. I won't name the customer here, but basically on Saturday, they have these Saturdays and Sundays, they have these peak events that require them to scale traffic 10x. Well, through cloud computing, we don't actually have to have all of that available for us, through the week or through the year. We actually go and reserve it, 2 days before the weekend. We know it's there for the weekend. We automatically scale up and scale down to support it. Additionally, I would say things like really truly adopting SaaS practices, or it's gotten so long now, it's almost embarrassing to say it, but DevSec FinOps types of practices as well, right? The one thing I haven't heard us talk about here is security. And when you think about, again, opening up your networks, becoming more of a platform, security actually becomes more and more critical. In fact, I'd almost argue one of the things operators have done a great job on is security of their networks. And that's part of what makes it hard for others to come on and easily use it. Well, if you're going to open up your networks more through 5G Advanced, you have to have much more robust security practices. Well, if we're all honest and looking at ourselves, right, like how quickly can we deploy security patches today, right? How easily is that done? How much are we doing that on a regular basis? Well, again, utilizing things like cloud or SaaS practices or DevOps practices where you have the right infrastructure in place, the right team structure in place to take that ownership, you should be able to do that in minutes, if not hours. And if you're anything beyond that, you're probably not ready to truly deploy 5G Advanced. So again, I think it's kind of the same concepts the networks are going into, right? So cloud computing, shared computing, utilizing cloud resources, AI becomes critical as well, moving more and more care functions into the cloud, or again, predictive analytics in terms of when traffic needs are needed. All of those patterns are going to be critical in the supporting systems, just like they are in the network themselves as features that we're selling on to our customers.
Wow, very interesting. I want to make a little shift here to the audience questions. We've got a few coming in here, and there's a couple of tough ones, I think. If mobile operators are already struggling to monetize 5G, what is the big advantage in 5G Advanced that will make that monetization possible? I know we talked a little bit about that. I think we'll turn this over to Eagle to have a stab at that.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that. Struggling. Maybe so. I don't know if we are struggling. We would like to see greater monetization of 5G investment for sure, and we are working hard at that. And we believe that we are making good progress, and we will get there. I don't think necessarily that 5G Advanced is going to be a silver bullet for how to better monetize the 5G network. In my introduction, or in the beginning, when we talked about new revenue streams, there is a couple of things that we do expect that we will be able to monetize. That's specifically with 5G Advanced, and that's especially in the IoT domain, because we didn't really have much capabilities designed into 5G initially addressing IoT. The notion was that narrowband IoT and Cat-M would live on, and sort of became a default third leg of the three-legged stool, as you remember, that was defined for 5G. So we didn't have a lot of capabilities initially. So when it comes to ambient IoT, I think it's a great opportunity. That is definitely a 5G advanced capability that I think will open up a lot of opportunities. But I think the whoever asked the question is right. There is no silver bullet with 5G advanced. I think it's also on the operator's responsibility to work harder on exposing the network through APIs and getting these new capabilities where we can address specific use cases that needs lower latency, and make sure that they get access to these advanced features that 5G already has. It's not necessarily 5G advanced features. So there are some new 5G advanced features, but in general. So because today, our networks from 1G and up to now, it's been a best effort network. And we've treated all the use cases pretty much the same, maybe with the exception of voice. We've always prioritized voice higher because voice does need special treatment. So we always said that no, we need to have good voice quality. But apart from that, all other services have kind of been treated the same. But now we have the opportunities. We have the slicing framework, and so we have the opportunity to treat use cases more custom to fulfill their individual KPI needs. So I think that is important. But in order to do that, you first and foremost you need 5G standalone. And if we look at the status of networks globally today, and maybe Peter, you can comment up on this, but I get the impression that there are still relatively low percentage of mobile operators around the globe that actually have launched 5G standalone. They've been testing it for some time, but certainly here in the US, T-Mobile have had standalone deployed nationwide now for many years, but I don't see a lot of other operators that have a 5G nationwide standalone network. And then operators continue to drag along LTE, and doesn't seem to be planning for a future when LTE, is going to wind down and retire. And keep in mind, we're already 5 years into 5G, and we sort of have these cycles of 10 years. So when you
Right.
look at voice, based on my understanding from talking with operators, I can count on one hand how many operators have actually launched voice over NR. Everybody seem to be using voice over LTE still. And I tell you what, we have worked really hard on voice over NR, and performance is on par, and often we have better KPIs on voice over NR than voice over LTE today. So what is it that is holding operators back? So we can talk about 5G advanced till the cows come home, but if we're not even taking advantage of sort of the inherent initial capabilities of 5G, such as standalone and voice over NR, that might be a good place also to start to make the networks more efficient and transition the spectrum over to 5G and start thinking about at least winding down LT. I'm not saying that LT should be sunset quite yet, but you need to have a plan for, and we need to have a plan for it at least.
Wow, that's the first I've heard of that. So rather than ask that same question to the other panelists, we have a similar question. 5G has yet to find killer use cases. Then why operators should even be considering 5G Advanced and 6G? So Munish or Sean, want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in first, and I'll let Munish jump in as well here. But what I would actually say is I think there's an interesting trend, and maybe even Peter's got some color commentary on this. But obviously, we are seeing a lot happen in kind of the netco servco separation, and so we're seeing a lot of operators look at how, and I think Eagle hit on this kind of indirectly in a lot of ways, right? But their network was really there to actually serve their subscribers, right? And so they made a lot of decisions thinking about, these 20, 30, 60 million subscribers that they serve and market. And the network was really downstream from how they were thinking about how they serve those subscribers. And they were, as companies, valued on their subscriber growth and retention and churn and everything else. And we've seen in a couple different pockets of the market now, companies actually start to separate their network assets from their servco assets. And the reason for that's really because the servco assets have become commoditized. And so when we talk about a killer app on 5G, well, that's going to be pretty hard in a commoditized market for that to emerge. But what we actually see, and again, I think there's probably still debate on how successful this will be, but we actually see is the netcos get different valuation profiles in terms of how they invest. And the reason for that is because there's more business opportunity for the netcos beyond serving those core traditional businesses to pursue new verticals and new revenue streams, which is obviously exactly what we've talked about here. So the killer app might not actually be something we traditionally think about, like streaming video or TikTok, right? Or something like that a traditional subscriber has. The killer app might actually be, again, opening that network up, separating it from the traditional servco businesses and finding new verticals and revenue streams that those networks can be pursued on. And there may be some financial engineering or re-engineering that goes along with that to allow those network assets themselves that have a different profile and regulation even in terms of how you can manage those from the servcos. So that might be the killer app, really, is to actually open those networks up and find those new vertical streams. And that might actually be where the funding comes from as well, to allow the operators to continue to pursue 5G Advanced and eventually 6G as well.
Great, thanks. Manish, you have anything to add?
So I would actually turn the question around in a different way, Joseph. I would say, who is 5G really helping? Right? If there is no killer app, then why would there be need for 5G? So first of all the Gs that we know, they have only added in terms of more throughput, but they have also always introduced more use cases. Till 4G, right from 1G to whatever 2G to 4G, there were things about voice. We can talk about it. Data, start with data, right? So the data was also in terms of getting multiplied with every G coming in. And again, in 5G, the pipe has become thicker. But this is a challenge when you think about as a user, which is my application that needs such amount of data, right? But it is not just one application. It is also set of applications. But it is also the simplicity that the 5G network has brought in. See, every technology, every piece of equipment, every capex has a life, right? As a shelf life. Over a period of time, you would end up replacing it anyways, right? What is the point of putting the same G equipment, and why not put the next generation, which would also be backward compatible but also give you a pathway to the next generation, which will not only cater to the current set of users. The current ARPU is only based upon the consumers, but like Eagle talked about IoT, right? That's a new market altogether. It started with 4G, but IoT market today, there are multiple technologies out there. But 5G, in terms of creating a common ground for all technologies to consolidate into one. So this would mean all devices, right? The cost of the devices going down drastically, the power saving, all those aspects coming in into IoT, because those are the learnings when IoT was introduced in 4G. 5G is actually perfecting it. Now, also, if you look at it, 5G was not just for today the mobile operators. I talked about NTN or non-terrestrial network operators, satellite operators. They didn't have a chance. There was no standards for them, or their standards were more proprietary in nature. They still had they had to live with high cost devices. They had to live with proprietary implementations. No ecosystem or open ran ecosystem that can help them reduce not only the cost but also help them evolve, help them technologically evolve for newer use cases. 5G Advanced is really catering to them. At the same time, verticals, private verticals, private networks. When 5G came in, everybody said, okay, you know what? It started again with 4G, but uh, pri- private networks was a theme for 5G as well. But uh, again, was the basic 5G good enough for them? Can you put them into industrial IoT? Was it good enough? That's where 5G Advanced coming in and actually applying those use cases, enhancing those use cases so that they can be adopted into those markets. Again, look at using sub 5 megahertz frequency, right? So those cases also have not been there, but once that gets applied, a lot of use cases will come in.
Okay,
But
great.
again, from architecture, network perspective, software defined architecture or software defined networks, it will drastically reduce the operating expenses. We talked about different use cases, how it will lead to whether from automation or AI, but it goes both ways, improving revenue and saving cost.
Fantastic. Um, instead of pushing that question to Peter, I want to throw another question. We have lots of questions for the audience. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to answer all of them because we're coming up on the hour. So we just have a few more minutes, and I want to get one last comment from all the participants. But Peter, I hope this is appropriate to send to you, push over to you. But what are the market opportunities for RedCap? At present, it seems quite limited, and most of the use cases are well served with current LP-WAN technologies.
So, I mean, I think it's it's a great question. And I think you kind of pull in some of this stuff from the earlier comments, right? Now, I want to go back to a bit of what Igor was saying in terms of, SA and then why we haven't launched SA. And I think Sean kind of answered that a little bit as well, because he was saying, look, what are operators looking at? They're looking at their existing customers, right? And their existing customers, the vast majority of them were consumers, right? I mean, they had consumers who were picking up 5G in droves on smartphones because they could consume more data. And we've got to recognize as data traffic goes up, 5G was great for helping meet that. So yeah, they focused on EMBB, which means maybe they pushed off those SA deployments because that was their existing customers, right? And it was easy to do that because yes, SA came with costs, particularly in the core. And so if they didn't see the value, and I think kind of hidden there a bit in Agil's answer was that there is a risk that we focus too much on 5G Advanced that we might push off SA. You don't need SA to launch 5G Advanced, right? There are some 5G Advanced use cases you could do without SA. And I use this as a context because I think it goes back to the opportunities for RedCap. I mean, looking at RedCap really means pushing more into those enterprise verticals and those new use cases, right? That includes things like FWA, right? FWA in terms of low cost CPE, you can do with RedCap better than maybe you can do with other NR technologies. And that's not going to be met with LP-WAN, right? And LP-WAN, 100%, you're seeing LP-WAN technologies meet some of those low cost IoT needs. Most of them don't scale up to that bandwidth that you get with RedCap, and they don't have the scale of the global standard, right? So I think the opportunities for RedCap are really that extension of what you see with on the IoT side of things. But I would also just add in there really quickly, because I know we're going to the top of the hour, I'll also just repeat that focus on passive and ambient IoT. I know it's been mentioned a few times here. Look into it if you haven't. And I think this is just a plea for everyone out there. If you have a chance to go out, see a demo, pay attention to it, please do, especially with passive IoT. I think we can sort of get the concept. It's a really cool thing, right? If you've ever gone, I mean, we're all jaded. You're on here, you've probably been in the industry a while. You're like, oh, I don't need to see another demo. But honestly, some of the cool stuff you can do with passive IoT, it seems so simple, but you can see some of the cool opportunities. So I think that this really goes back to that extension of the customer base.
Great, thanks. I want to wrap up by asking each of you to give sort of a 1 minute, summary of your what you're excited about and any challenges that you see. So I'm gonna set the timer here, and Eagle, why don't you start out?
Sure. Don't know if it's a killer app, but Peter touched upon it here. Fixed wireless access. It has been a great service for us on 5G. And we intend to continue to grow fixed wireless access on 5G. We see it as a huge opportunity for ourselves. What I see as a challenge, and I want to put it out in the industry as a challenge and something to work on, because I'm a little bit disappointed, maybe a little bit with industry as such and 3GPP, is that we haven't really done anything in the 3GPP specs to specifically address fixed wireless access. We're just using the mobile network with the specifications that are designed for mobility, and then we use devices that we just put in a location and use them for fixed wireless. But I can guarantee you, I'm certain that there are so many smart people in this industry. If we put our minds to it, and we could introduce capabilities in the network that takes advantage of the fact that these devices are not moving, they are fixed. And I bet you we could probably double the capacity on the network. So I want to put that out as a challenge, whether that is in 5G Advanced or definitely for 6G. We as an industry should think about fixed wireless access and how we can design the air interface and the network architecture to be much more efficient for fixed wireless access. I'm certain that there is an opportunity there.
Great, thanks. Munish?
Okay. I would touch upon 5G Advanced as the four pillars to the 5G Advanced, which we talked about. First being enhancing the connectivity. That's a basic. Then, most important, improving the user experience with the current set of the users and different applications which are today being used, and how does it help improve the experience there. Then, most important, opening up new revenue streams through new verticals adoption, things around those. And then, most important, also in terms of operational savings. But I would also say that 5G Advanced is a trailer to what we can expect is coming in 6G. So it is a starting point to that. But again, every G doesn't need to be a magic wand that will change, the life of a consumer or a user. But it's also what does it do to things around us? How does it affect everything around us? So that becomes very important. And I would say the mobility and everything else, it also exists beyond the smartphone. This is where it is starting to happen, and this will also create the pathway for the 6G.
Yeah, great, thanks so much. Sean?
Yeah, I think maybe just kind of playing on my earlier comments, I do think 5G Advanced gives operators the opportunity to move in a space where they make their networks more open, more platform based, develop new partnerships, find new revenue streams, again, maybe through the NetCo ServCo separation. So that would be my thoughts here. Is I do think 5G Advanced actually gives operators those new revenue streams. I don't know if I quite call them a killer app, but really it's a chance for them to evolve their business practices from, again, kind of focusing on those end subscriber B2C types of opportunities into these new business streams. And I think they've just got to continue to think about how they modernize their supporting systems as well as their networks as they go through that transformation.
Yeah, challenging as it gets more complicated. complex. So, Peter, up to you to wrap things up
Yep.
for us.
I'll just say I think it's a bit of a summary of I think what we've heard. I think for me the biggest opportunity is just doing something new, right? The fact that 5G Advanced can be a trigger, the fact that it's available as a trigger to look at open networks. Again, our data shows that that's a big focus for operators, for open APIs, API exposure, which helps them reach into new enterprise verticals, and even to the extent that maybe they don't even do 5G Advanced. Right, but this is then a trigger of, hey, if we're getting ready for this, we might as well get these other things in order to target these enterprise verticals, allow them to go and move into our markets, open up our networks. I think that's the real opportunity. The risk, the risk is twofold. I mentioned this earlier. It pushes off things like SA, which is incredibly important, but also there's the risk that they're too aggressive. When we saw us with SA, huge interest. Everyone said they were going to do it within years when it first launched. Kind of took them longer, right? We're still seeing that. Miguel called that out, right? We don't have that many operators globally that are doing it. And if they don't, right, if they see that slow movement, it could sort of hurt the reputation and hurt the internal momentum. And so I think they just need to be honest about how long it will take and how quickly they can roll it out.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank our 4 panelists. It's been very interesting. And also I want to thank the audience for their great questions, and apologies that we weren't able to get to all of them. I think so we might be able to respond to some offline. Again, thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you.
Appreciate you having me on the panel. Thank you.